You can stop watering your garden permanently, and not with some expensive smart irrigation system. Gardeners figured this out thousands of years ago, using nothing they couldn't find for free. In ancient China, they buried clay pots in the soil and let the earth drink on its own schedule. In medieval Europe, they piled logs under garden beds and didn't water for 20 years. 5 of those methods still work today. They cost close to nothing, and the only reason you've never heard of them is because nobody profits from selling a permanent solution. 30 years ago, the watering section at your local hardware store was a green hose, a metal sprinkler, and a watering can. Today, that section fills half the wall. Timers, drip kits, soaker hoses, smart controllers, replacement sprinkler heads, and enough plastic connectors to fill a bucket. Every summer you walk that aisle again and spend on the same supplies. A method that works once and never needs replacing is wonderful for a gardener and terrible for a store shelf. That is exactly why these 5 methods stayed quiet while the hose aisle kept growing. The first method is the oldest, and it starts with a clay pot. In parts of China and North Africa, farmers have been burying unglazed clay pots in garden soil for roughly 4,000 years. According to Pueblo County Extension at Colorado State University, these pots, called ollas, work through a beautifully simple principle. You bury the pot up to its neck in the garden bed and fill it with water through the opening on top. The porous clay walls let water seep outward into the surrounding soil, slowly and steadily, without a single drop lost to surface evaporation. The seepage is not random. The soil controls the rate. When the ground around the pot dries out, moisture tension pulls water through the clay walls faster. When rain soaks the bed and the soil is already damp, the water inside the olla stays put. Over time, the plant's roots grow toward the pot and drink exactly what they need, when they need it. Think of it like a tea bag sitting in hot water. The flavor seeps through the paper at a pace the water determines. You are not pouring, spraying, or scheduling anything. The earth and the roots do the work for you. A single olla keeps the soil moist in a circle, roughly 1 foot to 1.5 feet out from its walls, depending on pot size and soil type. For a small raised bed or a row of tomatoes, 2 or 3 ollas buried along the row can keep the whole bed hydrated for days between refills. You top them off once or twice a week, instead of hauling a hose out every evening. According to that same Colorado State source, ollas can reduce water usage by up to 70% compared to surface watering, because nearly all the moisture goes straight into the root zone. You can buy handmade ollas from potters and garden suppliers, or make your own by gluing 2 standard unglazed terracotta pots together at the rims with waterproof silicone, leaving the drainage hole on top as the fill spout. A cork or a flat stone keeps debris and mosquitoes out. Materials for a homemade version run about $5 to $15 depending on pot size, and a well-made olla lasts for years in the ground. You bury it once. You fill it with a hose. You walk away. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, and herbs all thrive around an olla. The steady root zone moisture keeps fruit from splitting and leaves from curling in the afternoon heat, and because the water never touches the surface, there is less splash on foliage and less invitation for the fungal problems that surface watering can spread. That handles one bed. But the next method scales the same idea to an entire raised bed, and it keeps working even when you leave town for a week. Method 2 is the wicking bed, and it turns an ordinary raised bed into a giant self-watering container. The concept is simple enough to sketch on the back of an envelope. You build a raised bed, line the bottom with pond liner or heavy plastic to create a sealed reservoir about 4 to 6 inches deep. Fill that reservoir layer with coarse gravel or river rock, and then lay your soil mix on top. A vertical pipe pokes up from the reservoir to the surface, so you can pour water in without disturbing anything. An overflow hole drilled in the side of the bed keeps the water level from rising high enough to drown the roots. And between the gravel and the soil, moisture wicks upward through capillary action. If that phrase sounds like a science lecture, picture this instead. Dip the corner of a paper towel into a glass of water and watch what happens. The water climbs up through the towel against gravity, pulled along by the tiny spaces between the fibers. Your soil does the same thing. The reservoir is the glass. The soil is the towel. Water climbs from below, and the roots drink from the moist zone in the middle of the bed. The surface stays drier, which means fewer weed seeds germinating on top. The roots get steady, even moisture from underneath, which means less cracking in tomatoes and less blossom end rot in peppers and squash. Building one costs the price of a sheet of pond liner, some gravel, a length of PVC pipe, and an afternoon. If you already have a raised bed, you can retrofit it by pulling the soil out, lining the bottom, adding the reservoir layer and pipe, and putting everything back. Total materials for a standard 4x8 foot bed run roughly $20 to $40, and the reservoir holds enough water to keep the bed moist for days without any attention. You fill it by putting the hose into the vertical pipe and leaving it running until water trickles from the overflow hole. That trickle is your signal. The bed is full. Walk away. The bed waters itself until the reservoir empties, and even after that the soil stays moist because the water already wicked up into the root zone. For a gardener with a stiff back, a full schedule, or a stretch of July heat that turns daily watering into a chore, a wicking bed changes the entire relationship between you and your garden. And because the reservoir is sealed under the soil, you lose almost no moisture to evaporation. While your neighbors are out with the hose every evening, you are filling a pipe once or twice a week and letting physics handle the rest. Those first two methods still need you to carry water to them. The next one lets the sky handle that part. Method 3 is rain barrel gravity drip, and it connects the free water falling on your roof directly to the garden that needs it. It needs no pump, no timer, and no electric bill. The setup is straightforward. You place a rain barrel under a downspout to catch roof runoff. Raise the barrel a few feet off the ground on cinder blocks or a sturdy wooden stand, and run a length of low-pressure drip tubing from the barrel's spigot out to your garden bed. Gravity pushes the water through the line. According to Blue Barrel Systems, every foot of elevation above your garden produces about 0.43 psi of water pressure. That is low compared to a household faucet, but more than enough for a drip line designed for gravity feed. Think of it like the old water tower at the edge of a small town. Nobody pumps water to every house in real time. The tower sits up high, and gravity moves water through the pipes below. Your rain barrel on a stack of cinder blocks is the same principle at kitchen scale. Raising the barrel 2 to 4 feet gives you enough pressure to run a slow drip line along a row of vegetables or around a cluster of containers. Open the spigot, and water trickles out at root level for as long as the barrel has something to give. A standard 55-gallon drum fills up fast during a decent rainstorm, and that water is free, unchlorinated, and already the temperature your plants prefer. No cold shock from the hose on a hot afternoon. Used food-grade barrels show up for $10 to $30 at farm supply stores, online marketplaces, and sometimes for free from restaurants that received cooking oils or syrups in them. Add a spigot kit, some half-inch drip tubing, and a few quarter-inch emitter fittings, and the whole system comes together for under $50. Once it is connected, you do not touch it. The rain fills the barrel. The barrel feeds the garden. You sit on the porch. One honest note. Gravity drip is slow, and that is the point. It is a trickle that soaks into the soil without running off or pooling. If your garden is large, a single barrel may not cover everything, so you can daisy chain 2 or 3 barrels together with a short connector hose. Start with one barrel feeding one bed and see how much daily watering it replaces before you invest more. During a long dry spell with no rain for weeks, you may still need the hose. This method dramatically reduces your watering labor, but it depends on rain to refill itself, so results vary by climate and season. All 3 of those methods work in the ground or in raised beds. But if you garden in containers on a patio, a deck, or a balcony, the next one was built for you. Method 4 is the self-wicking container, and it is the cheapest and fastest to build on this entire list. The idea is a miniature version of the wicking bed, shrunk down to fit inside a 5-gallon bucket or a plastic storage tote. You take 2 containers of different sizes, nest the smaller one inside the larger, and create a small water reservoir in the gap at the bottom. A strip of cotton fabric or an old t-shirt torn into strips acts as the wick, dangling down into the reservoir from the soil above. Water climbs the wick, keeps the potting mix moist, and the plant drinks whenever it is thirsty. A small hole drilled in the side of the outer container near the top of the reservoir acts as an overflow so the roots never sit in standing water. Think of it like an oil lamp. Wick sits in the fuel at the bottom and draws it upward to the flame. Your plant is the flame. The water is the fuel. The cotton strip pulls moisture against gravity, just fast enough to keep the soil damp without drowning anything. According to Savvy Gardening, these sub-irrigated planters work well for peppers, herbs, lettuce, and most container vegetables. You fill the reservoir through a small pipe or by pouring water into the gap between containers, and depending on size and weather, a full reservoir can go days between refills instead of needing attention every single morning. 2 5-gallon buckets from a hardware store cost about $3 to $5 total. An old cotton t-shirt for the wick costs nothing. A drill and a utility knife are the only tools. You can build one in about 15 minutes, and the materials are cheap enough to line a whole patio railing with them for less than the price of one fancy self-watering planter at the garden center. Same physics, same results, a fraction of the cost. For anyone who gardens on a small deck or balcony and has come home from a hot weekend to find every pot bone dry and wilting, a hidden reservoir underneath the soil changes that story. The water waits for the plant while you are away. If you are finding these useful and want more ways to garden without spending money you do not need to spend, sticking around and following along is the best way to see more. Those first 4 methods handle watering for days or weeks at a time. The last method does something different. It stores water for years. Method 5 is Hugelkultur, and it is the grandest, strangest, and most permanent of all 5. The word is German. It translates roughly to hill culture, and the practice traces back centuries through Eastern European and German farming traditions. You dig a shallow trench, fill it with logs and thick branches, pile smaller sticks, leaves, and compost on top, cover the whole mound with soil, and plant directly into the surface. Over the years, those buried logs decompose slowly, and as they break down, they become a massive underground sponge that absorbs and holds moisture the way a fallen log at a campsite soaks up a spilled bucket of water. According to the Old Farmer's Almanac, experienced Hugelkultur gardeners have found that beds built high enough can go without irrigation entirely after the first year or 2. The buried wood acts as a long-term moisture reservoir, feeding the soil above for years as the logs slowly rot. And as the wood breaks down, it releases nutrients back into the bed, so the soil gets richer over time instead of poorer. A kitchen sponge is the right picture. A dry sponge weighs almost nothing. Soak it, and it holds many times its weight in water. Now imagine a sponge the size of an oak log, buried 2 feet under your garden bed, staying damp for years as it slowly decomposes. That is what the wood does underground. To build one, start with a trench or a flat clearing about 4 feet wide, and as long as you want the bed. Lay your largest logs on the bottom. Hardwoods like oak, maple, and apple are good choices because they decompose slowly and hold moisture for a long time. According to the Old Farmer's Almanac, you should avoid black walnut wood, which releases a compound called juglone that is toxic to tomatoes, peppers, and many other garden plants. Pile smaller branches and sticks on top of the logs. Add a layer of leaves, straw, or yard waste. Then cover everything with several inches of compost and topsoil. The mound starts tall, sometimes 2 to 4 feet high, and settles over the seasons as the wood compresses and rots. Water it well during the first growing season, while the wood is still absorbing moisture and the soil is establishing itself. By the second season, the bed starts holding moisture noticeably longer than a conventional garden plot. By the 3rd year and beyond, many gardeners find they water only during the driest stretches of summer, and some stop watering altogether. In the first season, while the mound is still settling, plant shallow-rooted crops like lettuce, beans, and squash that do not mind shifting soil. By the 2nd year, the bed is stable enough for deeper-rooted tomatoes, peppers, and even small berry bushes that will produce for years alongside the slowly composting wood beneath them. The cost is as low as gardening gets. Fallen branches, storm debris, tree trimming leftovers from a neighbor clearing brush. All free. Leaves and straw come from your own yard or a nearby farm. Compost and topsoil may cost something if you do not make your own, but you are building a bed that feeds and waters itself for the better part of a decade. Compare that to the running cost of hoses, sprinklers, timer batteries, and monthly water bills, and the math is not close. One practical note. Hugelkultur beds take up space and look unusual in the first season when the mound is tall and raw. They work best in a backyard where production matters more than curb appeal. A shorter mound, just a foot or so high, still gives you the moisture benefit and draws less attention from the neighbors. 5 methods. A clay olla buried in the soil. A wicking bed lined with gravel. A rain barrel on cinder blocks. A pair of $5 buckets with a cotton wick. And a pile of old logs under a mound of earth. Not one of them needs electricity, a subscription, a phone app, or a trip back to the store next summer. The principle running through all of them is something your great-grandparents understood without ever reading a garden blog. Water wants to move. Clay lets it seep, fabric lets it climb, gravel lets it pool, and wood lets it soak. You put the right material in the right place, and then you get out of the way. The modern garden industry built an entire aisle around making you forget that. Timers with batteries, hoses with quick connect fittings, sprinkler heads that crack every second season. Every piece designed to bring you back to the register. These 5 methods do the opposite. They ask for your attention once, and then they quietly do their job while you do yours. Picture a July evening next summer. The ollas in the tomato row are full and sweating gently through the clay. The wicking bed has not been touched in 4 days, and the lettuce looks perfect. The rain barrel caught last week's storm, and the drip line has been feeding the pepper bed all on its own. And that strange mound in the back corner, the one the neighbors asked about in spring, is buried under squash vines, so thick you cannot see the soil. You did not water today. You did not water yesterday either. You are sitting in a chair with a glass of something cold, watching a garden that learned to drink on its own. If that is the kind of gardening you want, the kind where you do the work once and the garden handles the rest, you will find more of it here. Drop a comment and tell me which of these 5 you want to try first.